I'm Kartik. I'm a founding engineer at Say. So a little bit of my background, I used to work at NVIDIA, studied at Carnegie Mellon, and worked at Google. So I have like a very practical sort of mindset, not very ideological. I come from an AI background. And so one of the things that excites me the most about x402 is that I strongly believe it's the only practical use case in crypto and AI. I think everything else is just ideological, decentralization for the sake of it. But I think x402 has the pieces that can go beyond just what crypto believes is necessary for people. So I'm particularly excited. And I think one component of that is facilitators, which we need to get right to make normal users get more used to the chain and get used to this x402 use case. So what are facilitators? As you guys are probably familiar with x402, they are the fundamental gateway for x402 users between normal payers and the actual blockchain, right? So they quote fees, they enforce the limits, they verify, and they settle transactions. You can think of them as RPCs, paymasters, but they're that fundamental gateway. And so I think it's very important that we make it as usable and make sure that the UX is very strong. Right? And so one really interesting thing that's happening now as x402 is maturing and there's more activity, there's more hype, facilitators are starting to charge fees. So I noticed this happened around December or November timeframe. Third Web was arguing between Coinbase's method of charging a flat fee and their own method of charging percentage fees. So the base thing is that you cannot run a facilitator for free, right? You settle transactions on the chain, there's gas costs, there's infrastructure costs. This is not something that's just going to be subsidized forever. And so this was definitely a moment to reflect on how do we want to best charge fees that normal users can both easily describe what they're paying for as well as know exactly what they're paying for. And so we had this basic fee disclosure as part of this proposal we have for x402 where the most obvious thing that was missing was I have to go to Coinbase docs or Third Web docs to even figure out what are the facilitator fees. So let's standardize that. Let's make it so that servers can route based on a specific fee model or how much the fee costs. Even this is controversial, but it seems obvious to me that you at least need a standard for disclosure. And I think what x402 v2 at least is moving towards is this system of multi-facilitator routing. And what that means is the SDK itself will choose a facilitator or the server will choose a facilitator based on different heuristics. And right now those heuristics are pretty vague, right? They're uptime, maybe there's a performance heuristic, maybe you can even choose specific facilitators based on a compliance policy. But the most important, in my opinion, is the fee model, right? Especially if x402 is targeting microtransactions, the fee model that the facilitator uses is very important, right? For determining whether a transaction even makes sense to send. So if you see over here, a certain facilitator may charge a percentage fee with a cap. Others might charge a flat fee. And when you're talking a tenth of a cent or a hundredth of a cent, these facilitator fees can eat up a large portion of the transaction, right? So this sort of multi-facilitator routing is what v2 canonicalizes. And when you add in our previous facilitator fee disclosure, you make facilitator fee routing an actual market with more dynamic information. So one big problem is flat fees kill micropayments, right? And we know this. Card network minimums are 30 cents, right? So anything above 50 or anything below 50 cents is uneconomic, right? So this is why stablecoins make sense. But even with stablecoins, if I charge a tenth of a cent or a hundredth of a cent, it doesn't make sense for a lot of transactions, right? And we have to think about it in the way of APIs. When I'm getting the weather from San Francisco, this isn't a call that's going to take $2 or $10. This is a millionth of a cent or a tenth of a cent, right? And so every small transaction fee will aggregate and will make it uneconomic, right? So you can see here, obviously, for $10 amounts, a 5 cent flat fee is fine. But for normal API calls, right, which are high frequency but low value, even charging a flat fee of 5 cents is way too much, right? You're going to lose huge amounts of margin on each one of those calls. So maybe for users, flat fees don't make a ton of sense. But there's another possible issue for facilitators. If you don't charge with flat fees, you can run into gas issues, right? So think about it this way. When the settlement cost is greater than the fee earned for every transaction, then you're just losing money on every transaction, right, as a facilitator. I could just be sending like a 1/10 of a cent fee transaction, and me as a facilitator has to land that transaction on the chain. And if the gas is too much, I'm losing a massive amount per that transaction. I'm not going to enable it, right? So there's definitely this weird dynamic where for users, you care about really, really low fees. Obviously, the microtransactions is very sensitive to the amount. But for facilitators, they have to run an economic business, right? So we at SEI are sort of thinking about how we can best deal with this. There's some workarounds. Obviously, some chains offer gasless transactions, but there has to be something in the middle. The second thing here that I want to discuss is just on different threat models that will come up, right? And so this is one thing that I think x402 will start bringing to light more, is that micropayments add this threat model that we normally aren't used to, especially for humans who use like card networks. On the payer side, there's spam and DDoS, like I covered. On the facilitator side, they can sort of lie about how much they're settling and overprice you. And then on the chain side, there's obviously adversaries who can exploit the chain. Right? I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. We kind of covered this before, but like I mentioned, even if you want to make microtransactions economic and viable by, let's say, removing gas costs, right? I can be an attacker and I can basically spam the facilitator, right? And because they have to settle that transaction, they're forced to lose a ton on gas costs. And I myself only have to pay a fraction of a cent per transaction, right? So easy spam and DDoS vectors that microtransactions enable. And there's ways around this. The one that's most common and frankly what we'll have to deal with is batching, right? Even though we don't have to batch like how card networks batch, you can batch, let's say, up to an amount that makes economic sense for the facilitator. So they can wait until they receive, let's say, n transactions that each in aggregate will allow them to settle a normal transaction that they can take profit from. This is still an open question. Then there's like various like pricing attacks, right? So the facilitator itself, there's no guarantees that what they're quoting me is actually what's going to settle, right? So in the quote, they can say, hey, I'm going to charge this amount and variable based on the gas price, like I will settle in the most fair way. But in theory, they can go back and say, oh, like, I charge you 50 times more because the chain gas was super high. And we're talking about users who are just using an API. They don't want to deal with the blockchain. They don't want to deal with any of this infrastructure. So in theory, these facilitators can get away with it, right? And so some workarounds that kind of we've addressed in the proposal, like you can standardize disclosure, like a signature in the receipt so that you can guarantee that this was the amount that was used for settling and this was the amount that we quoted you, and they're roughly similar. And there's other ways as well as like reputation, right? Like so certain facilitators, if they overquote or they sort of misuse funds, like you can route to another facilitator who has a better reputation. And then yeah, there's like gas fees. This is normal, I'd say, but like definitely something that gets worse as you accept microtransactions. If an attacker like can watch the gas and flood the network right as congestion increases, they themselves may not have to pay a ton, but the facilitator is going to be in charge of basically landing these uneconomic transactions, right? So there's a lot to do here. Some of the mitigations here are not super great, right? Like deferring settlement, again, isn't great UX. I think what is more interesting to me here is potentially at the L1 layer introducing like a payment lane. So you guarantee inclusion and you have like potentially gasless transactions for just stablecoin transfers. Then things like congestion from trading fees and whatnot don't necessarily affect x402 API calls. So yeah, in general, we're particularly excited about x402 and we have this proposal out. There will be a lot more coming. I think one on the product side, there's a lot to do to make x402 kind of like a card network, the product that normal people use. But then even from a chain perspective, there's stuff on like, this specific attack vectors, payment lanes and whatnot that as more of these payment lanes pop up, we're going to have to sort of face. So would love to connect. Hit me up on Twitter or email and engage with our proposal. Thanks.